The Black Alchemist is an extraordinary story. The events and details of this book, along with the underlying implications surrounding it, are so incredible and so unbelievable it could change your view on the world forever. All locations and discoveries made are documented with verifiable proof and photographs captured to validate the circumstances surrounding this book. The author and individual in which this story is surrounding is history and science writer Andrew Collins. Much of Collins' background is unknown to me. However, he has written a number of significant books surrounding ancient knowledge that will undoubtedly challenge the way we see the world. Some of his other works include Göbekli Tepe and the Cygnus Mystery, to name a few. The story follows Collins and his friend and business partner Bernard as they attempt to unravel the mystery surrounding the occultist and black magician known only as the Black Alchemist, as he attempts to complete an ancient alchemical ritual, utilizing dark energies and the mysterious primordial influences of sacred and historical sites. The motives and intentions surrounding these practices is what the author seeks to discover. The events of this book took place within the years of 1985 and 1988. The story begins in Tewkesbury Abbey. After Bernard, who is an adept psychic and occult practitioner himself, travels here after receiving impressions to visit this ancient site which houses the grave of a powerful 12th-century monarch known as Robert Fitzhamon, the Baron of St. Clair. It is here that Bernard communicates with the spirit of Robert Fitzhamon through an occult practice known as clairaudience. During this communion, Bernard is informed of the Stave of Nizar, a powerful symbolic relic that passed through the hands of many kings and empires through antiquity. The search for this staff would eventually lead Bernard and the author to Lullington Church. The search for the staff, however, was a cover-up in order to lead them on the track towards the Black Alchemist. Their very first encounter with him can be found during their visit to Lullington Church, where they looked for clues on the staff, only to stumble across a ritually charged spearhead which was implanted at the church site by the man they would come to dub the Black Alchemist, who, under careful scrutiny of the magical symbols inscribed on the spearhead, appeared to be attempting to complete a powerful alchemical ritual which, if never interfered with, would have granted him unprecedented levels of power. Since Bernard is highly sensitive, coming into contact with such things leaves him sick. Before continuing, it is important to know that throughout Andrew and Bernard's journey, they continue to receive support and information as to their next plan of action by spirit guides. These guides communicate with them in the form of automatic writing or visual impressions as to key locations they should travel to. It has been stated by the author that we all have a spirit guide, and he attributes much of his psychic questing success through the communion with these entities. As Collins and Bernard continue following the clues and information available, by studying and researching the symbols and inscriptions engraved on the spearhead, they come to the realization that BA is a highly knowledgeable practitioner of the arcane arts, and that whatever he aims to accomplish, it must be investigated. What you see is an actual image of one of the spearheads strategically implanted at one of the churches in question. The words engraved read, "To touch is to enslave." We can only imagine that this would have put either men under possession if they had carelessly come into contact with this object. The next several chapters depict BA's various attempts to challenge the author. From leaving traps, like the one previously mentioned, to being as bold as watching them from a distance in a critical moment in the story, where Collins, Bernard and a group of 3 other researchers and journalists visit a suspected location known as Hill Church in Kent, England, where upon psychically attuning to the presence of Bernard, BA removes one of his ritual items from the interior of the church, shortly before the group's arrival. And within the midst of the community scavenger hunt taking place at the time, he was able to monitor their movement from an anonymous vantage point as they follow behind his tracks and investigated the locations where he is conducting his practices. Around this same period of time, BA has continued to link with the investigators through telepathic means, and has been able to gain unsettling amounts of information about the author, leaving a death threat letter specifically addressed to Collins, which he strategically left at one of the churches in question in an attempt to intimidate and deter the men from continuing on with their investigation. According to the contents of the threat, it reads, "You, who looks after the power of the mind, say goodbye. Life after death. It also states that Collins only had 9 days to live before the threat was expected to be fulfilled. In response to this, they begin preparing for what could be a confrontation with the man himself after the 9 days are up. To follow BA's footprints, we come to find that he is specifically targeting historically significant landmarks as the places of power for his operations. It is believed that due to the historical and geographical significance of these landmarks, there is a certain level of residual energy present at all times at these sites, which allows BA to utilize and manipulate the forces present to accomplish his own twisted pursuits. The sites in question make up a ring of influence that surrounds the entire region, which would be coined the Ring of Darkness. The sites that constitute this Ring of Darkness include Lullington Church, Rittenden Church, Hill Church, and the Running Well. After traveling to all 4 locations in the Ring of Darkness, collecting the concealed artifacts and banishing the energy field of influence established there, we find ourselves at the intended date in which the death threat was said to be fulfilled. During this day, Collins is getting impressions to travel to the Running Well, where he and Bernard prepare for a possible confrontation with the Black Alchemist. The Running Well in Essex, as depicted in the background, is a historically significant site overlooking the entire region, and is connected to a number of landmarks and a water preserve that reveal it to be situated on a ley line. It is here that Collins and Bernard prepare for what could possibly be a confrontation with BA. On the night of Tuesday, October 14, 1986, they travel to the Running Well and set up camp there in order to deal with any possible confrontation. What happens instead is BA never shows up, and upon linking with his mind's eye, it would seem that for the time being, they have scared him away and forced him to retreat to a distant county, giving the men some time to finally breathe. A few days pass following the events of the Running Well, and things seem to have died down. Until one evening, Bernard has a foretelling dream surrounding the recent episode, and wakes up that next morning with an inclination to visit a nearby antique fair and search around for any books or items of interest. Upon reading the local newspaper the next morning, and discovering that there was indeed an antique fair that afternoon, Bernard hastily makes his way there, and peruses through the various books and items in search of anything of interest, until he comes across a young Native American man, along with his grandfather, who had explained that they were waiting for him. After a cryptic conversation, the old man hands Bernard a strange sword stick which he claims has mysterious powers of protection and good fortune. Later that day, when Bernard and Collins meet up to investigate the staff, they come to the conclusion it actually is a magically charged artifact, but for what purpose it serves has yet to be revealed. After Bernard receives the mysterious sword stick, which the man claimed would aid them in their quest, an entire year passes, and no new incidences arise after BA's retreat on the night of the Running Well incident. During this time, Collins and Bernard are busy on other psychic quest. The story picks back up on the night of October 15, 1987, during the coming hours of the Great Storm of '87, in which a deadly hurricane ravaged the countryside of England, leaving death, destruction and devastation in its wake. A long night of strange paranormal events would envelop the lives of those affected. The morning after, Collins meets up with a few colleagues in order to piece together the strange visions and occurrences which took place during the height of the storm in the early hours of the following day. Accounts of wolves, witches, and unaccounted screaming are just a few of the bizarre events reported on the night in question. Despite the collateral damage from the storm littering the countryside, Collins travels to the estate of one of his colleagues, who is well versed in magical literature so he can continue his research on the Lullington and Rittenden fixing markers. As they skim through manuscript after manuscript, they come to the conclusion that the symbols and sigils inscribed on the stones are words of power known as Goetic barbarous names, which were derived from an ancient Egyptian magical language used for invocations and ritual purposes, dating as far back as the 1st century AD. These names show us that BA attempted to use words of power in order to manifest dark forces utilizing the psychically charged atmosphere of the churches to increase the potency of his rituals. On the night of October 27, 1987, only a few days after Collins has completed his research of the stone-fixing markers, Bernard calls him and informs him of a strange premonition he'd just had revolving the recent activities that have been taking place at Danbury churchyard. So without further word, the men meet there. What happens next is a bizarre sequence of events. After visiting the church for the first time since the storm, they come to find there is an unusual presence of dark energy permeating the atmosphere. After attuning to the site, Bernard unknowingly opens himself to a psychic attack as it is soon apparent to them that there is an otherworldly entity present at the site, as it attempts to take over and possess Bernard's body. After several agonizing minutes of convulsions, screaming and panic, Collins is eventually able to purge Bernard's body of the malevolent force after performing a series of banishment rituals. As they begin to realize the full magnitude of the situation, Collins and Bernard hastily retreat from the churchyard to regroup and figure out what just happened. After Bernard consoles his spirit guide, it is revealed to him that the psychic attack was a direct attempt at a demonic possession on his soul from the Black Alchemist himself. The entire year of his disappearance, he was scheming and plotting in the shadows. During the night of the storm, several different occult groups, many of which were unaware of each other, were actively taking advantage of the situation by utilizing the chaotic and high-octane forces present at the time of the storm to achieve their own personal means, the Black Alchemist being one of the parties involved. The entity that was manifested at Danbury churchyard was the spirit of a 3rd-century alchemist known as Maria the Jewess. It is well known in the occult world that during certain times of the year, like the changing of seasons, or the coming of the winter solstice, various primordial earth forces which govern different hemispheres of the planet gain immense influence and power, as the entire atmosphere we live in changes before our very eyes, as the summer months wither away into the bitter cold days of the winter months. And given that at this point in the story, Halloween is only a few days away, it starts to become easier to connect the dots and begin to see the bigger picture as to how these shady individuals are even able to make these attempts possible. The practices and intricacies of these occultists are unknown to me. However, it has been stated by the author that when such practices are invoked, it must be looked at with the understanding of the incredible potential and capabilities of the human mind. I must state before continuing that I, the creator of this video, hold no affiliations and look at the entire story surrounding this situation with an open mind, knowing that with our modernized lifestyles, us modern people may never realize the full potential of our own minds. So to deny the claims made in this book would be to essentially reject anything that doesn't fit into your worldview model. It has been said that the primordial earth force being invoked in order to aid the Black Alchemist in his twisted operations is known as Hecate, an ancient Greek goddess of sorcery and witchcraft, as depicted in the background. As we approach closer and closer to the winter, her power and influence is said to grow as Hecate is known as a goddess of the night. During BA's one-year absence, he was able to enlist the assistance of a female accomplice, who, through her own feminine form of black magic, is more easily able to attune to the presence of the earth goddess Hecate. With the newfound knowledge that BA is not alone in his workings, Bernard and Collins more than ever are on high alert as to his next move. With all the various events that have taken place up until now, the reader gets the distinct impression that everything is culminating in a final showdown that could carry monumental consequences. Halloween comes and goes, and due to business obligations, neither Collins nor Bernard have a chance to investigate Danbury churchyard. Until November 1st, only a few days later the men would meet there. From a foreboding vision Bernard had the night before, upon searching the area, they come across a hollow pit of dirt on the east wing of the churchyard. Upon digging out the contents of the pit hole, what they find is a black flintstone calling card, with the words "We came" inscribed into the stone, along with a series of various astrological symbols. After attuning with the piece of stone, they are able to confirm it indeed came from the Black Alchemist. After retrieving the flintstone with its hieroglyphic imagery, Collins and Bernard are under the impression that their work in Danbury churchyard is settled. Until November 5, 1987. Only a few days later, after meeting at the local pub outside the church, Bernard begins attuning to the site as a result of a foreboding feeling he is telepathically receiving, and is now getting impressions of further ritual artifacts still being present somewhere around the churchyard at that very moment. BA has struck again. So without further word, the men venture out into the darkness. What they eventually find is a disturbing sight. As they venture outside, they find that they are not alone. Things are getting very serious, as they soon discover that among them is the presence of a malevolent spirit which had been ritually manifested there by the Black Alchemist himself. The spirit present on this particular night was not Mary, but rather a high priest and ambassador of hers known as Camarius the Prophet. As Bernard slowly begins to lose consciousness as the demonic entity takes over his body, it immediately dawns on them that these have been planned attempts. As Bernard was attacked in a similar fashion only 4 days earlier, as Collins soon realizes that his banishment rituals aren't working, he turns his attention to removing the final artifact implanted in the churchyard. What he finds is a disgusting sight. After digging through the crevice of an upturned tree stump, he finds a heart, pierced through by a black dagger with a smiling ape for a hilt. After retrieving the strange dagger, and reburying the heart, Collins would return to Bernard, who is still in torment and agony, as he continues to fight a losing battle against this evil spirit. As Collins frantically searches for ideas on how to release him, he suddenly remembers the potent protective powers of the mysterious Indian swordstick, which he had brought with him in anticipation of this sort of occurrence. Pulling it out, he performs a visualization technique where he envisions the positive life energies of the swordstick pouring out into the ground and transferring into Bernard's body. After several minutes pass, it seems this would work as Bernard calms down and slowly comes to his senses. With the incredible events that just transpired, the two hastily gather their things and leave the premises to sort things out the following day. After the events which took place in Danbury churchyard, Collins would go on to re-enlist the help of some of his psychic questing colleagues to decipher and decode the symbols engraved on the ape dagger, which was used to pierce the ritual heart just the night before. They come to find that through the fixing markers, calling cards and engravings, the mysterious group working against them is utilizing the planetary influential forces of Saturn, Mercury and the Moon, in the form of the Goetic barbarous names and Greco-Egyptian magical inscriptions, in order to bring about the birth of an otherworldly entity through occult means, in an attempt to bring about a new world order where they would supersede the powers that be, and usher in a new era of chaos and anarchy. With the full realization that they are dealing with a highly dangerous individual, for the next several months Collins and his team of researchers would travel around searching for any further clues and hints as to B.A. and his female accomplice's next move. After several wasted trips, and many false leads, it would seem that the shadowy group's trail had gone cold, and as a result Collins and Bernard would part ways for a time to pursue other more realistic endeavors. Several months after the trail had gone cold and no word of the Black Alchemist had been brought up, the men would eventually go back to their everyday lives. Until the night of June 4, 1988. Over half a year after the Danbury churchyard incident, Bernard would receive a strange prophetic vision of the Black Alchemist, wearing a black cowled hood on a grassy mound of open land performing a challenging gesture at the psychic, as he wields twin daggers in either hand beckoning towards Bernard. This patch of land would later be identified as Paradise Mound, a location nearby Danbury churchyard. And it is here that the author suspects B.A. will attempt to complete his manifestation ritual. As the men prepare for what could possibly be a final confrontation with B.A., they spend the next several days informing friends and close associates of the upcoming event, as they will need all the support they can get to take down a man as deranged as the Black Alchemist. Following this, Bernard and Collins would travel to Danbury, to attune to any recent activity there. During his attunement, Bernard begins to link his mind's eye with the Black Alchemist. His mind is now being flooded with imagery of all the nefarious practices and rituals B.A. has been conducting up until this point. As he slips into a light trance, coming out of the trance, all has been made clear as it is revealed to him that on August 8, B.A. would engage in a major magical ritual in an attempt to bring about the birth of the Black Child, a form of Antichrist, conceived in Danbury churchyard, in the aftermath of the Great Storm, which would be gestated in the womb of the old crone Mary the Jewess. After about a week, we finally find ourselves on the fateful day of August 8, 1988, as Collins and his crew set up at Paradise Mound and conduct an extensive protection ritual to shield them from any maleficent thought forms or entities projected their way. As they are preparing for what is to come on the mound, they are spotted by a scout and cohort of the Black Alchemist. As B.A. begins to realize his plans are being thwarted, he begins to conduct a strange manifestation ritual, where he is able to conjure up wolf-like thought forms of pure dark energy towards the group in an attempt to remove them from the mound. For the next hour, they would remain on the mound banishing the energy forms and releasing the landscape of his psychic influence. After this long ordeal, the group is exhausted. But their efforts were not in vain, for the Black Alchemist absolutely needed to utilize the energy forces present on Paradise Mound at that particular time of the day to conjure the unholy birth of the Black Child, and so he retreats not to be seen again. For now. With this, the book ends and Collins and Bernard can finally breathe a sigh of relief. However, the Black Alchemist is still out there, and continues to interfere in the lives of these two men for years to come, as we continue the story in the second and final installment of this episode in Andrew Collins' book titled The Second Coming.